Todd Reyes had no idea he was bragging about getting a federal agent fired. He said it right to his boss's face, calling me a liability, calling me expendable. 3 weeks before I would watch him lose everything he'd built his career on. My name is Claire Donovan. When I walked into Meridian Logistics on a Tuesday morning in March, badge freshly printed, coffee in hand, nobody in that building knew what I actually did for a living. My resume said government contract experience. That part was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. What it didn't say was that Meridian shipping manifests had been quietly flagged 3 months earlier for a vendor kickback pattern nobody inside the building had noticed yet. Todd shook my hand in the lobby without really looking at me. Already scrolling his phone. Already deciding I wasn't worth his attention. Compliance analyst, he said like he was reading it off a form. You'll shadow Priya this week, then you're on your own. I said that sounds great. And I meant it. Because shadowing Priya meant access to every file I actually needed to see. I smiled. I nodded. I let him believe exactly what he wanted to believe. He had no idea who he was talking to. The badge scanner beeped green that first morning. I stepped into an open floor plan buzzing with keyboard clicks, and the low hum of someone's conference call on speaker. By Thursday, Todd had already found his rhythm with me. In the Monday ops meeting, he stopped mid-sentence to point at a formatting error on my compliance summary, holding it up like evidence in a trial. This is the kind of thing that makes us look unprofessional to corporate, he said, loud enough for the whole room. I said I'd fix it right away. I didn't argue. I've sat through worse briefings than a Monday morning meeting at a mid-sized logistics company, and I've kept a straight face through far more than a man in a half-tucked button-down criticizing a font size. Some days that straight face cost me more than I let on. There were nights I sat in my car in the parking garage for 10 extra minutes before driving home, just to shake off the version of myself I'd been performing all day. After the meeting, he handed me a stack of expense reports to audit, work usually given to interns. Priya caught my eye from across the room, an apology written all over her face that she didn't say out loud. I took the stack. I said thank you. Inside, I was already cataloging something else entirely. Something Todd didn't know I was there to find. He thought he was managing a new hire. He was auditioning for a file that already had his name in it. That afternoon, Todd made a comment near the break room, half under his breath but not quiet enough. Guess HR needed their diversity numbers this quarter, he said to another manager, and laughed like it was nothing. Nobody corrected him. I refilled my coffee. I walked back to my desk. I opened a new document. I didn't write his name. Not yet. I just wrote the date, the time, and exactly what he'd said because I've learned that people like Todd always give you more than you need eventually. You just have to be patient enough to let them. By Friday, I'd filled 2 more pages in that same document. Small things. A comment here. A dismissive email there. None of it looked like much on its own. That was the point. By the second week, patience was starting to look a lot like discipline. On Wednesday, I sat in the back of the boardroom while Todd stood at the front, presenting a fraud detection fix to senior leadership, walking the VP of operations through a process I had built line by line the week before, using language I had written in my own internal notes. He never once said my name. I noticed a gap in our reconciliation process and thought outside the box, he told them. What he didn't mention was that his own quarterly numbers had been quietly under review since January, or that this presentation was as much about saving his own job as it was about fixing anything. I watched him take a sip of water like he'd earned it. Nobody in that room knew any different. For a moment I let myself feel exactly how that landed, the small burn of it, before I put it away where I keep things that aren't useful yet. That night, working late, a message came through on the Slack channel Todd used for the ops team. A private thread he must have forgotten I could technically still see through a shared reporting bot. Not sure why we even hired her tbh, he wrote to another manager. Feels like filler. She'll be gone by summer if I have anything to say about it. I read it twice. I took a screenshot. Time-stamped. Saved to a folder that had nothing to do with Meridian's internal drive. Then I closed my laptop and went home like nothing had happened. Because nothing had. Not yet. Friday afternoon, Todd called me into his office. Door half open. Arms crossed like a man rehearsing a speech he'd already decided the outcome of. I want to be direct with you, he said. This role requires someone who fits the pace here, and honestly, I'm not sure you do. If things don't improve, I don't think this is going to work out long term. I nodded. I said I appreciate the feedback and I'll take it seriously. What he'd just described, without realizing it, was the opening language of a formal performance improvement plan, the kind Meridian's own HR handbook required to be documented and shared with the employee in writing. He hadn't filed a thing. He just said it out loud in a room with no witnesses, thinking that made it safe. I walked back to my desk and sat down. For a second I just stared at the stack of expense reports still sitting in my inbox. Untouched. Waiting. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A number I didn't recognize. No name attached. I stared at it for a second too long before I answered. I stepped away from my desk before picking up. Out of habit more than anything. I slipped into the stairwell, where the concrete swallowed most of the noise from the floor above. Case status update, I said, before I'd even finished closing the door behind me. My voice came out flatter. Faster. Nothing like the tone I used in ops meetings. There was a pause on the other end. A question about timeline. I answered in 3 clipped sentences that had nothing to do with compliance audits or expense reports. Then I caught myself. I glanced at the little reinforced window in the stairwell door. I softened my voice back into something ordinary. Yeah, no, I'm good, I said like I was talking to a friend about weekend plans. And hung up. When I pushed back through the door, Priya was standing by the printer a few feet away. Her eyebrows drawn together just slightly, like she'd heard something that didn't quite match the coworker she thought she knew. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. I just walked back to my desk like it hadn't happened at all. Monday morning, Todd requested a meeting with Denise Holloway, the VP he reported to. He didn't try very hard to hide what it was about. I saw it on the shared calendar before he'd even sent the invite. Staffing concerns, Rhea's team. I had a call of my own scheduled around the same time. A routine check-in. Nothing unusual. Except the only open room was the small glass conference space directly beside the one Todd had booked. I finished my call quietly, phone pressed to my ear, voice low, and that's when I heard him through the thin shared wall, rehearsing his pitch to Denise before she'd even sat down. She's not a fit, he was saying. Honestly, I think we made a mistake bringing her on. She's basically dead weight. I could replace her with someone half as expensive who actually contributes. I stood very still. I didn't move toward the door. I didn't react at all. Not on the outside. I ended my call. I set my phone down on the small table in front of me. For one long moment I just looked at it, at the screen still lit up from the call I just finished. Then I picked it up again. I typed 4 words to a contact saved only as a set of initials. And hit send. Through the wall, Todd's voice kept going, confident, easy, already halfway convinced he'd won something. And I want to formalize this by end of week, he said. If that works for you. There was a pause before Denise answered him, a half-second longer than a simple yes would have taken. The kind of pause that meant she was choosing her next words instead of just agreeing with him. Denise's phone rang before she could answer him. I heard the shift in her voice immediately. That specific tightening people get when a call is more important than whatever meeting it's interrupting. This is Denise, she said. Then a pause. Longer than a normal pause. The kind that changes the temperature of a room. Yes, she said. I understand. Yes, she's here today. I actually wondered about that stairwell thing a few weeks back, she added, almost to herself more than I let on. Through the glass, I watched her expression change in a way I imagine Todd noticed too, because his own sentence trailed off mid-word. Denise asked a question I couldn't fully hear. Then she said, embedded since when? Another pause. Her eyes moved toward the wall between our 2 rooms, like she could suddenly see through it. I'm sorry, she said slowly into the phone. You're telling me Claire Donovan works for the Bureau. On the other side of that glass, Todd's face had gone the color of the drywall behind him. He said something I couldn't hear. Quiet. Almost to himself. I understood exactly what it was because I'd have said the same thing in his position. Every message. Every comment in that private Slack thread. Every word he'd said about me not being a fit, replaceable filler, dead weight. All of it sitting now in a file with a case number attached, a file that had never actually been about him personally, right up until the moment he made it about himself. Denise ended the call and looked through the glass at me. For a second neither of us moved. Then she opened the door to her office and asked me to come in. I walked in already composed. No longer needing to play the analyst who took notes in silence and said thank you for feedback that never once touched the actual required paperwork. Todd stood up when I entered. Some old reflex of politeness he clearly regretted a half-second later. I sat down across from both of them. I set a folder on the table. Not slamming it. Just placing it. Deliberate. Inside are the irregularities in the Q1 reconciliation reports, I said. The ones Todd presented as his own fix 2 weeks ago. And beneath that, the actual gaps that fix never addressed. Todd opened his mouth. That's he started. That's not, I was just frustrated, that Slack thing was just venting, it wasn't serious. I slid a printed page across the table. Time-stamped. Screenshotted. Already logged. This wasn't venting, Todd, I said. This was documentation. And you did most of it for me. Denise picked up the page. She read it once. I want to be clear about something, Denise said, setting the page down, her voice steadier now than it had been on the phone. I've had questions about these numbers for 2 quarters. I just didn't have anyone I trusted to actually run them down. Then she looked up at me with an expression that had nothing to do with authority and everything to do with recalculating every assumption she'd made in the last 20 minutes. How long, she asked quietly, have you actually been watching us? Since before Todd ever corrected my formatting in a Monday meeting, I said. I didn't say it to hurt him. I said it because it was true. HR was looped in by that afternoon. Sharon Whitfield from HR came up within the hour, laptop under her arm, and asked Todd to step into the small conference room off the main floor. Legal joined by phone 12 minutes later. Through the glass, I watched Todd's hands moving as he talked, fast at first, then slower than not at all. Sharon didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She just kept sliding printed pages across the table, one after another, and watched him read each one. He walked out carrying a small box of desk items past a floor that had gone almost completely silent. Nobody said anything to him. Nobody had to. Priya caught up with me near the elevators afterward. Arms crossed. Somewhere between impressed and unsettled. So the stairwell thing, she said, that was real. I told her as much as I was allowed to. Which wasn't much. She nodded slowly, like she was rearranging the last 2 weeks in her head. Other coworkers did the same thing over the next few days. Small comments. Careful ones. People realizing that every offhand joke in a Slack channel might have had an audience they didn't know about. I didn't enjoy that part. I made a point of telling Denise directly that this was never about embarrassing anyone on the team. It was about a pattern that started with financial irregularities and happened to intersect with a manager who thought cruelty was a management style with no consequences. She listened. She shook my hand at the end of that conversation, and it felt less like a goodbye and more like the actual first honest conversation we'd had since I walked through that lobby. 3 weeks later, the case closed. Quietly. The way most of them do. With paperwork instead of headlines. I sat across from my actual supervisor, badge from Meridian already deactivated in a drawer somewhere, and gave my final briefing on a laptop that had nothing to do with compliance audits or expense reports. Before I left the building for the last time, Priya stopped me by the elevators again. This time just to say thank you, for reasons she still only partly understood. I told her that was enough. I walked out into a parking lot full of ordinary cars under an ordinary sky. No music swelling. No dramatic exit. Just a woman heading home after finishing a job most people would never know she'd done. Todd spent 2 weeks convinced I was beneath him because I let him believe it. He never once asked why a compliance analyst answered a phone call in a stairwell like her life depended on the next 4 words she said. I didn't think about him much after that. I thought about the parking garage instead, the 10 minutes I used to sit there some nights and how I didn't need them anymore.